This video will contain spoilers.
I recently started rereading the series Songs of Chaos. For those of you who don't know, Songs of Chaos is a Dragon Rider fantasy series, currently 3 books long as of the writing of the script. The narrative of this series hinges on one particular set of actions committed by the main character, Holt Cook, and the fact that no one else has ever committed these actions in 1,000 years. What do I mean by this? Well, there are 2 things that you need to know about the dragons in this series. First off, as far as we know at the start of the series, there are only 5 categories of dragons in this story, based on what type of magic the dragon can channel. These types are the fire dragons, ice dragons, the emerald dragons, the storm dragons, and the mystic dragons. The second thing you need to know is that dragons are very Spartan when it comes to their young. If a dragon senses any weakness in a dragon egg, such as a birth defect, they will Yeetus the egg out of the nest. The hook to the story being that there are more than 5 categories of dragons in the universe. Whatever the dragons are sensing in those eggs that make them think the baby will be born with a birth defect is also weeding out magics outside of the main 5, though technically it can be both. As I mentioned earlier, Holt Cook is the hero of this story. Holt was born a commoner and he grew up as a cook, working in a dragon rider's keep. One of the dragon riders, trying to teach Holt a lesson, educates Holt as to the fetus deletus nature of dragons. Holt, being an idealistic boy, is obviously horrified by this, and Holt reacts by sneaking into the dragon rookery and sealing the egg that was slated for yeeting. The dragon inside that egg hatches, and Holt is introduced to a blind baby dragon, which he would go on to name Ash. Later, he discovers that Ash can channel lunar magic. In a form of irony, lunar magic is actually a kryptonite to the Scourge, the mortal enemy of both humans and dragons. But that's not the topic of today's video. So my question is this: how is Holt the first one to discover that there are more than 5 categories of dragons, when riders have existed for about 1,000 years, and of course dragons have existed for far longer? Is that realistic given what we know of the story? Well, by the end of book 1, I was comfortable enough with the conclusion that it was. Unfortunately, my opinion started to change as we got into book 2. So we can assume that the dragons haven't changed their nature, at least not significantly throughout their existence, so they would naturally get rid of any eggs that did not fall within the 5 magic types, either by tossing it into a body of water or abandoning it in a wasteland. So what happens if one of these abandoned eggs happen to hatch? Well, it's a baby, and at least for a time, they would require someone to care for them. Without a parent or someone acting as a guardian, they would be unable to get food. It takes a dragon a while before they can gain access to their magic. This is all assuming that the recently hatched dragon isn't predated upon by something much larger than it. So, what happens if a dragon with a birth defect happens to hatch within a dragonflight? Well, presuming the dragons don't notice the weakness prior to its hatching, unfortunately, dragons don't believe in a trimester limitations when it comes to abortions. There has been more than one situation where a dragon has noticed that Ash is blind and will try to attack him. One way or another, I don't believe an abnormal baby dragon out in the wild would survive long enough to discover their magic, much less if one were to be born with a dragon flight. But what about an abnormal hatchling born amongst the dragon riders? As I mentioned earlier, the dragon riders have been around for about 1,000 years. Surely humans would have a calming effect on their dragons, and this is where the crux of my question really comes in. Is Holt really the first human to save an egg with a birth defect in 1,000 years? Maybe not. You see, during the course of the story, we do see one dragon born with a serious birth defect. The poor thing ends up dying seemingly painfully. Presuming an event like this occurred early on during the history of the riders, I could understand why humans would just follow the dragon's direction as to their young. After all, this is a medieval setting. There's probably aren't too many veterinarians specializing in dragons, certainly not when the order was first created. That would be such a cool job though. Besides that, the purpose of the Dragon Riders is to combat the Scourge. They cannot afford weaknesses within their own rank. Besides, Ash is probably a 1 in a million situation. it probably wouldn't be too easy to replicate him. You see where I'm going with this, right? The end of Book 1 introduces what may just be one of my favorite villains in a fantasy story. Sovereign is a mystic dragon that hates both humans and the Scourge. I know the image on screen isn't a dragon, just bear with me. Sovereign, through means not yet known, has managed to gain some control over the Scourge, and is leading them in a war against humanity. What makes Sovereign one of my favorite villains is how he keeps adapting throughout the series. Yeah, my standards are very low right now. When Sovereign first meets Ash, he is able to learn his true nature almost immediately. Unlike most dragons that are heavily prejudiced against Ash, Sovereign finds them intriguing. Sovereign even tries to recruit Ash to his side. When that failed, Sovereign went with Plan B, hatch his own lunar element dragon. Good news is he failed. The bad news is that he managed to hatch at least 6 new dragons, and he manages that in a relatively short period of time. I don't know if Ash is 1 in a million, but certainly hatching a dragon outside of the 5 types is not. Either that or Sovereign's luck is out of this world. Bro can probably pull a Rider of Black from a single gotcha spin. The point I'm trying to make is, even though I like the events of the story, it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to believe that no one has discovered a dragon outside of the 5 elements I discussed previously. Finally, I'll say this. There are examples of dragons that are peculiar, but somehow did not qualify as a dragon that would be yeeted. Amaranth is a good boy, by the way, and the best character in the series. I'm prepared to fight anyone who says otherwise. Amaranth is an emerald dragon, introduced in Book 2. Despite being an adult, he is small. Holt mentions he is about the size of a small pony. By the time of his appearance in the story, Ash is probably only about a year old and is already much larger than Amaranth. Amaranth is an outcast of the Emerald Dragonflight, not just for his size, but due to his personality. He's a bit skittish for a dragon and incredibly nerdy. He researches things like a human scientist would.
Hey master, I am a scientist. It's so cool, son of a bitch.
Which is especially in contrast to the Emerald Dragons, whom are much more connected to the living world. Amaranth lives a solitary life, growing and studying mushrooms in the forest. Amaranth's home is full of pots and vials with different potions, to the point that Holt actually compares it to an apothecary. Actually, Amaranth teaches Holt a form of alchemy that enhances both his and Ash's abilities. He also bred a species of insects similar to the fireflies. He's easily the strangest dragon in the series, even compared to the dragons outside of the 5 magic types. Considering how unusual his size is, I imagine that would have to be genetic in some way. Even a dragon. How would something like that avoid notice? Hopefully, we can get a little more information in Book 4. Despite this question, I'm still looking forward to the series. Probably one of the first times I have actively stalked an author's social media for any info on a sequel. Anyway, if you're reading this series, go ahead and let me know below. Tell me what your favorite dragon type is. If you have enjoyed this video, please give me a like. And if you enjoyed my inane ramblings, please follow the page. Peace.